Okay, so hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Full Global. That's where we explore stories of resilience and transformation in the tech world. I'm your host, Vitaly Koval, and today we're joined by Joliz Cedeño, the Executive Director of Techqueria. Who's made this significant strides in empowering Latinx professionals in the tech industry. So, Jalice, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Vit. I'm really excited to be here and talk about the work we've been doing.
Awesome. And let's start with your story. In fact, you have a very inspiring story, and maybe could you share a bit more about your journey, particularly maybe those moments that shaped your commitment to community building and equity?
For sure. I was born in New York City, but was quickly moved to Barceloneta, Puerto Rico as a young person, where essentially like we lived in El Campo is what we call it in Puerto Rico, where my neighbors like had chickens. We had a whole like orchard, and it was a very community based support system. We would share foods and things as we got older, because the thing is, as we continued um, to have needs, because essentially we were all each other's support. Everyone was not making a ton of money, but because you had the support of your neighbors, I learned very early on the importance of community. And when I lived in New York, I lived in Section 8 housing, and that was similar because we were each other's translators, we were each other's biggest cheerleaders, and we were each other's support system in navigating everything from the education system to the police system to even just housing in New York City. So I've always been very community centered, and that's how my mom like raised me. And that's also part of the Latinx culture, is to think of us as a we versus an individual. So that being said, I grew up going to after school programs in New York. And one of the things that I found really important was seeing the impact of having outside opportunities to enhance yourself. So I was part of a group that did work for youth development, and I learned a lot there. It was called Global Kids. It was also my first job. But one of the key things that also is a really big part of who I am as an individual is being a fangirl, which people are like, what does that even matter? So me being a big fan of things means that I actually learned a lot of really important skill sets, from everything from like research to, being able to advocate for others. But what really made it a big turn in my career is that I saw all the people that I was a fan of weren't represented online. I would see the NSYNC and Backstreet Boys websites, and I'm like, where are all the people that look like me? So I taught myself how to code, so I could make fan sites, and that's how I got into tech. And it was fun to do for a long time. But then as my career expanded, I ended up going into the nonprofit world and specifically focusing on youth development. And that's where I got to merge the love of tech and working with young people. So we were able to support young people being able to use tech for social justice issues, which to me was like a merging of all the things I found most important. And through that, I worked at places like V-Day, which was the movement to end violence against women. And I worked at Code Nation, which was about teaching high school students front-end web development and getting them careers in tech. And that's how I got introduced to Techqueria. I joined the community when I was part of Code Nation. It was a community of folks from the Latiné community. And I was able to connect because we were first looking for volunteers to come do our program. And I was like, oh my God, these people are amazing. And then when the role for executive director came up recently, one of my associates who I knew from Techqueria was like, you should apply. And that's where I got.
Yeah, that's quite a powerful start, I guess. It sounds like those early experiences really set the stage for what you do now, right? So, shifting gears a bit, and let's dive into how your past has influenced your current mission, right? So Techqueria has this bold mission to empower Latinx professionals in tech. So, can you talk more about the company itself, about the organization itself, and some of the maybe key initiatives that Techqueria is currently doing to like undertake that mission that you have?
Absolutely. So, Techqueria is a 501c3 nonprofit. We focus on the career development, support, and retention and career progression of Latina folks in tech. And we do that a lot by connecting with companies and organizations to be able to provide services for our community, including everything from career fairs to resume support to panels to speaker opportunities and all those kinds of things. But it's not just about like the career work. It's also about building community. Techqueria at its core is a community. We were built by 3 friends who were at a taqueria in the Bay Area who were just looking for ways to connect because our representation in tech has not been great in terms of being able to go into spaces and see yourself, not just see yourself, but feel welcomed and supported. So this was a space created so that folks can have not just connections and networking to folks within the industry, but also have that cultural connection together that makes folks understand where you're coming from and what you're navigating within the tech industry as a Latina person.
And with such impactful initiatives, I'm curious about the milestones you have hit since you joined Techqueria. What have been some of the most maybe significant achievements for the organization?
Absolutely. So Techqueria started around 2016, 2017 as like a social group. In 2019, they made the shift to being a nonprofit. I came on in August of last year as executive director. I'd been a member before, so I've seen the growth happen up until now from the outside and now fully in. Some of the key things that were really important in the growth of Techqueria is the services and supports that have been created. Aside from all of the career supports, it's really about thinking about how do we build socioeconomic mobility for generational wealth. Because it's not just about, getting that 6-figure income. For Latina folks, as I said, we're a communal culture. So our 6-figure income does not stretch in the same way as like a cis white male coming right out of like an Ivy League, because we're providers in our communities. So essentially, the idea has been thinking about how do we build connection, how do we build support, and also just making sure that it's a space where people feel as though they have a say and that they're supported. So another key milestone for us is our annual summit. So what's special about our summit, because a lot of places have conferences, right? But for us, what we think is important is not just being able to talk about what's it like to be Black and brown in tech, why our DEI practice is important, which are all important conversations and what I'm here to talk about. But at our summit, which is called Techqueria Tech Week, this is where we get to talk about issues in tech from the Latina perspective. How does AI impact the Latina community? What about the tech hubs that are happening in Brazil, in Haiti? What about like finance and what about taboo tech, which is an area that's fascinating to me. So our summit, which we are now having, I believe it's our 4th this year, if I'm not mistaken. It's a multi-day summit with speakers from all around our community. We do a call for speakers in June, if anybody's interested. And so we get topics from our community of what they want to hear about and what they want to talk about. So there's a multi-day virtual summit, but then we have our chapters. So Techqueria has 10 chapter cities across the US. So this is Boston, New York, Atlanta, Chicago, Milwaukee, Austin, Albuquerque, San Diego, the Bay Area, and Los Angeles. And so during that week, we also have in-person activations at each of these cities so that folks can really make sure to connect in person as well. And what's exciting this year is that we also get to not just support people who are career seekers or looking to network, we're also supporting founders. In LA, we're doing a startup pitch competition this year alongside with it. So it's really exciting. And if anyone wants more information, you can go to techqueria.org or hola@techqueria.org.
Yeah, that's incredible progress. And look, you touched this a bit. You mentioned this a couple of times, but I would like to go a bit deeper. So, considering the nature of your current work environments, right? How does Techqueria foster this sense of community among its members, especially given the challenges of remote hybrid work environments, and some other challenges that you might know and you can talk about?
For sure. So, Theia as a grassroots community, we did start as a social club. So, there were meetups and people really got connected in person. And then when the pandemic hit, our Slack kind of became the lifeline of our community. It's where we connected, not just on like things having to do with work, but some of my favorite channels have nothing to do with tech. It's usually like about like food or music, or the memes channel is wild. But nonetheless, we created a space in which people felt like they could be their authentic selves and connect with each other in that way. And so when we were back to being outside, our chapters were really activated to meet their new online friends that they had developed together. So we also were mindful of creating programming that supported folks, not just in the virtual space, but also offline and in person. So in the virtual space, like all our career fairs that we co-host with Blacks in Tech are in person, are virtual. We have resume support that is virtual. We have panel discussions and things that are virtual. So we try and make sure that it's accessible to all, because it's 18,000 members across the country. And not everyone is in those core cities like Miami and Dallas and all those places, which are filled with lots of Latine folks. But we got folks in like Wyoming and all that stuff that still need access to support and community. And aside from that, we also do, when we're talking to companies, we're often talking to their ERGs, their employee resource groups, and we're working with them on how to develop a more inclusive and supportive ERG internally, and supporting them with being able to navigate internally on how to get more resources for their programming, and how to ensure that folks have the ability to skill up and move up in their career within their company. So it's also thinking about how do we influence our other companies to have that level of inclusivity, have that sense of belonging, so that it's no longer a question on why we're in the space. It's like, how can we ensure that everyone feels welcome here?
And I'm just curious, at this point, what are the biggest challenges that Latinx professionals face in the tech industry today? And how is Techqueria addressing these issues?
I mean, I'll say Latina professionals face the same challenges that mostly everyone does, which is, there's the layoffs, the fact that jobs are, there isn't stable work, that AI may take over a lot of roles. So those are the things that obviously everyone is concerned about. What's specifically special to our community is actually thinking a lot about our space within the community, within the tech community. And so what I mean is oftentimes we're seen as customer service roles. We've been approached to try and get more bilingual folks on customer service, as if that's our only role in tech, or we're kept at a lot of entry-level positions. And oftentimes my questions to companies is like, hey, what does representation look like at your director level, at your C-suite, in your board? And also just being recognized for the value that we bring to a company. Not that being multilingual is a requirement to be Latina, but a lot of us are, and a lot of us bring that skill set to the table, and are often used at companies as like the internal translator, but it's not in our job description, and we're not paid extra for it. So being able to advocate for these things, and also as I shared, one of the key things that I'm going to keep harping on is that we're a communal culture. That not being seen in benefits package is really concerning. So, for instance, the bereavement package, does it include people outside of your parents directly? Like if someone else in your community passes, that's really important to you. Is your company going to recognize that and allow you space to time to grieve? Being able to negotiate, being able to find support that's culturally competent to who you are. A lot of companies offer great professional development opportunities that may not necessarily speak to Latine folks. Like some companies are like, oh, we'll get you a career coach. That's amazing. I love that. However, finding a career coach is like finding a therapist, and you don't vibe with everyone in the same way. And if they don't understand your cultural context, it becomes really hard to like work together. So companies also need to invest in ensuring that they are having, it's not just like support in terms of representation, it's also support in how do you make sure that this is a space that is mindful of everyone in it. So Latina folks, by supporting the needs that we have as a community, it's actually being supportive of everyone. Because listen, expanding a bereavement package is actually going to be helpful to all groups, not just Latina folks. Being able to have a diverse group of folks who can provide career support is good for all, not just Latina folks. So those are kind of the things that are kept in mind in terms of the Latina community. And then there's also like larger issues. I think about, the H-1B visas for folks who are coming, who are working from other countries, and how that creates an incredible painful experience for folks if like they get laid off and suddenly have to uproot their entire world. If they're not able to get sponsored or hosted by a company, you miss out on so much talent in that way. So now, and again, I want to name that that's not true of every person in the Latina community because we're not a monolith, but those are some of the big issues for a lot of us.
And with your experience, what maybe 3 key pieces of advice would you give to tech companies looking to improve their diversity and inclusion practices?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing I would say is if you're thinking, oh, okay, like I just need to hire more diversely, that's like not even the base level. That's like getting to the base level. So it's thinking about your hiring practices. Do you have bias in your hiring practices? Are you only recruiting from certain schools? Are you only recruiting from certain cities and communities? Are you, once people are hired, are you sure that you are making pathways for people to grow within your company? Is there representation again on the director level, C-suite, board? Do you have folks who are diverse in those spaces? So like that's base level. And then we jump into things that are more important. So like I was talking about with benefits in terms of, opportunities for professional development, your benefits package, does that reflect the communities that you are supporting? Are you thinking about what does that look like to hire folks who are, multilingual, and what are the packages you're gonna provide for them for that extra service? One of the things that I think about a lot also is by making places more accessible for marginalized groups, you're actually creating a better space for all. And I'll use myself as an example. So like, as a fat woman, I spend a lot of time thinking about chairs. And what I mean by that is like, I go into spaces, I think about, okay, like, is this like is this going to feel sturdy? Am I going to feel uncomfortable in it? And when I'm in a space, then I'm thinking more about the chair than actually paying attention and being able to like engage with whatever's happening around me. And therefore, like, where the space that I'm in is not getting the best of me because I'm so concerned about this other thing that could be so easily handled. If a company moves in the space where they're like, we're just making everything accessible to all, and I don't ever have to think about that because I go into a space knowing that there's going to be like a perfectly fine seating for me, that means that I am able to contribute to conversations and be innovative, be able to support folks, and also everyone gets a comfortable seat. Like that means everyone wins.
That's a very good point. But recently, there's been some opposition to the DEI programs. Why do you think this is happening in various sectors, including corporations, companies, universities? Do you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, so essentially, people often think that when you are leveling the playing field, when you are providing access to those who have not had access previously, they see that as that's taking away from them. Like, you are now taking away from me. When instead, by having more seats at the table, you're not actually losing out more food. You're bringing more food too. You're bringing more to the table, and you're able to have a space in which you're having more innovation. You're having more ability to see what are concerns that could be happening to the company that may have not been noticed before. And people often see that as a threat when actually it's something that is helpful to the company. I think of some really tangible examples that in my past and working with young people going into tech, I would often give. So let's say you're going to wash your hands and it's one of those automated faucets. When those first came out, there was really quickly seen that folks with darker skin tones would not be able to get the faucets to work, would not be able to get the water out. And this was because the faucets were created by a white team who were tested on white folks who only recognized white skin. So it meant that once it was out in production, anyone with a darker skin tone could not get the water faucets to work. And if you had some diversity in the space, this could have been caught early instead of now this company has to backtrack and try and redo all of this work that has already been done. Or thinking about some of the AI filters that happen in different like Snapchat and TikTok and IG, in which when they were first rolled out, also did not recognize darker skin tones and got a lot of heat for it. And so when you're able to create a diverse space, folks can really point out like, hey, this is where your blind spot is. This is what's missing. This is what you're not taking into consideration within this community. This is what works in this city does not work in this other city. So not just we're talking about not just like diversity of folks who come from different cultures, but also just like different representation of different areas. What makes sense in New York doesn't necessarily make sense in Austin. Doesn't necessarily make sense in Seattle. So it's important to have that reflected. And I think that what happens within tech is people often are making statements that feel a bit empty. So like when we're talking about the post the murder of George Floyd, when everyone started putting those black boxes and companies started making these statements, I think about this James Baldwin quote where he's like, I can't believe what you say because I see what you do. So if internally you are working to make your company something that is reflective of the world that we live in, and you are supporting your people to do their best work, then no one will question you in the open market because they can believe what you say because they see what you do.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Mm-hmm. And from the business perspective and from your perspective, again, how does DEI contribute to business growth and innovation? And what are some maybe benefits you have observed, some real facts, real examples in companies that prioritize DEI?
I think that by prioritizing DEI and prioritizing, and when I say prioritizing DEI, often people just think like, oh, we're going to have some like seminar or something like that. But no, this is about not just hiring practices, training practices, but also like benefits practices, and also just like the ability for a company to navigate in spaces. So some of the things that I think I've really found great is recently we were in talks with a company who specifically thinks about, because they hire folks from Latin America, that they ensure that that company communication is delivered in both languages. They ensure that there's ability for folks to be able to navigate in their own language and share information. Then, so now that they are opening it up, because you have communities of workers in different places, you're not essentially you're allowing those folks to be able to think and execute in their native tongue, which brings a lot more innovation to the space. I also think about for us, we think about the values of our vendors and organizations and companies we work with. I have seen companies be very specific and thoughtful about how they onboard vendors, because we're considered a vendor when they work with us as a nonprofit. So I've filled out forms where they'll ask about hey, what's the environmental impact that your organization has? Do you have representation on all these different places? So by asking those questions, by just being able to note that of the people they work with, they're able to say publicly, hey, not only do we walk the walk with our company, but we also ensure that others working with us do the same. And those companies tend to have high levels of employee satisfaction, high levels of employee output, a lot of employee retention, and also just that then conveys to customer satisfaction, because especially the millennial and Gen Z communities often think about supporting businesses that are value-based. We think about what's the environmental impact? What are their stance on anti-racism? And we often support more companies that studies show that we often support more companies that reflect the values that we hold important to us. So it's not just an investment to be nice and kind, which is great, but it's also an investment in making in providing more innovation and providing more profit, if that's what's important to a company, which often it is.
Yeah, that's certainly inspiring. And probably my last question. So for Latinx professionals seeking to advance their careers in tech specifically, what maybe practical advice would you offer?
So honestly, the same thing often a lot of people get told, which is upskill yourself, make sure you're getting, to me, the most important thing you can showcase is a growth mindset. So going for certifications, thinking about ways that you can support your learning pathways as you are navigating your career. But I think that also what's really, really important is investing in your community. A lot of times people use the phrase, your network is your net worth, which I find really corny, but it is true. But what I mean by investing in your community is that one, developing a community is really important. So having people that you can connect with and talk about things. So it's not just connecting with people with fancy titles, because that's often what people see as networking. It's about building the group around you that's going to help support you through as you navigate your career. Who's that person that's really invested in your learning, who's going to see a fellowship and be like, hey, Vit, I think that this would be great for you. I know that this is something that you're interested in. Or, hey, I heard about this conference, let's go together. Or, hey, I got asked to speak on this panel, but I'm not available. Can you do it? Because I think that you would be great at it. So it's making sure that you're building not just upward your community, but outward, and also supporting those who are coming in as well. Because it's not just about doing it because it's a reciprocal thing. If you are a tit for tat person, that's going to come off as disingenuous, and people are not necessarily going to want to work with you. I think the biggest piece of advice I can give folks is to be respectful and kind to everyone you meet. You never know the impact that you have as you navigate your life and your career. And people remember not necessarily the number of dollars you brought in or the really complicated code you were able to push on GitHub. They remember how you made them feel. Yeah. And so it's important that as you are going through your life, that you're treating folks well, and you're being kind and respectful, because you never know whether that person may know somebody that might be a support to you, or can even give you a heads up on like, hey, you don't want to work at that place. I've heard terrible things. So being able to build that community of people who are people you trust, who are invested in your growth, and who, are just wonderful support system, is really important for you to feel successful. And I don't just mean monetarily, because while Techqueria definitely wants to support socioeconomic mobility to build generational wealth, but there's also the wealth of just being healthy, happy, and feeling supported. So community building is really the big piece of advice I would give Latine folks going into tech. And you can do that by looking up different organizations. Like, obviously, I'm going to recommend Techqueria, but there are lots of other organizations. Find one that fits your values. And when you find one that fits your values, you will be able to connect with really amazing people.
Awesome. Joliz, thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, your experiences with us today. It's been super inspiring.
Thank you so much, Vit. I appreciate the opportunity to come speak here. And of course, again, if anyone wants to learn more, please hit us up at techqueria.org, or email us at hola@techqueria.org.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.